If you've been playing video games long enough, you probably remember your first. The first video game you played, the first video game you beat, the first system you bought on your own, the first time a game made you throw a controller into the wall, the first time a game made you cry. The video game medium is relatively new, and when compared to other mediums, like books or music, it's just a baby. The good news of that? We get to explore recent video games and what those games ultimately mean to us. Let's start here. What really was the first video game? The answer depends on what definition you use, and it sort of requires a history lesson. If you want to define a video game as any piece of programming that can play a game, then believe it or not, the answer goes back to 1940. At that year's World's Fair, Edward Condon, a physicist working for Westinghouse, designed an electromechanical machine that could play a game called NIM. The object of that game was for players to be the last to remove the last object from a set of objects. According to Condon, the NIM was used more than 100,000 times by players, with the computer winning more than 90% of the games. However, the NIM hardly resembles anything approaching a video game as we know it today. Indeed, further games continue to be developed, including computerized versions of certain card and board games. The game that is largely recognized to be the first ever video game, at least on an analog computer, is Tennis for Two, developed by physicist William Higginbotham. Higginbotham was a brilliant physicist who had actually worked on the Manhattan Project and was preparing for the annual science exhibition at the Brookhaven National Laboratory where he worked. While reading the instruction manual for one of his computers, Higginbotham discovered that the computer in question, a Donner Model 30, could calculate the movement of a bouncing ball. With that in mind, Higginbotham set to work on designing a tennis game, for no purpose other than to help kids have fun. Using an oscilloscope, Higginbotham designed a two-player rudimentary tennis game, complete with two paddles that each player could use. Pressing a button moved the ball, and altering the knob controlled the angle of the shot. It wasn't just advanced, it was revolutionary. Players lined up to play the game, and Higginbotham would say that they practically had to pull high schoolers away. An upgraded version of the game, complete with the simulated gravity of Jupiter, was made available the next year. So, the first arcade game was really displayed for a science exhibition. This begs a follow-up question. What was the first arcade game designed explicitly for commercial purposes? The answer to that is Computer Space, a 1971 game created by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. This game was essentially a remake and an upgrade of Space War. That game is one of the first computer games to appear on multiple computer platforms. The plot and end goal of this game are a little different than what we're used to. You engage in a space battle against a computer-controlled opponent where you're each trying to shoot down a UFO in a set time period. The UFOs do fire back, and you keep spinning regardless of your own control. However, if you win, you get a free round. To make the game affordable and replicable, Bushnell and Dabney created custom-designed hardware which allowed the game to be produced commercially. The two partnered with Nutting Associates, an arcade game manufacturer, to create the game. Working together, Nutting, Bushnell, and Dabney designed a customized fiberglass cabinet, the coin slot, and the controls. The game was teased at the Music Operators of America Expo in 1971, and it was a hit. Nutting ordered 1,500 units of the game for distribution, which players enjoyed, even though some found it difficult to control and play. The success of the game would reaffirm the belief of Bushnell and Dabney that there was a future in arcade games. At the time, the partners worked under the corporate structures of Syzygy Engineering. In June 1972, they created a new corporate structure, Atari. You may have heard of it. Keep in mind that these games were played largely in bars. In fact, the first test location of Space War was a bar near Stanford called the Dutch Goose. Arcades were around, but they largely featured mechanical and electromechanical games. It took the development of games like Space Invaders to lead to the golden age of arcades. Of course, the game that really set arcades into the stratosphere, and increased commercial awareness of arcades in general, required more than just great play. It needed a mascot. The first great mascot of video games, long before Mario, Sonic, Master Chief, or Astro, was Pac-Man. The development of Pac-Man started in 1979, and the idea for the game, as well as the character, came from the mind of Toru Iwatani. It's important to realize that Iwatani's brilliance in the creation of Pac-Man lied in his realization that there was an untapped market that too many game developers were missing. At the time, all video games involved some form of fighting. They were largely war or space-oriented. Iwatani realized that this left half the population, women, feeling excluded. As such, he set about designing a game that appealed to women and men, with the goal of changing arcades from, quote, the gloomy places where only boys want to hang out. What I wanted was to make arcades livelier places that women and couples might enjoy visiting. This started Iwatani thinking about what girls enjoy doing, and he came upon eating. Let's just ignore the implications of that thought. The inspiration of Pac-Man himself came directly from a pizza pie with a slice removed. In later interviews, Iwatani said that Pac-Man was intentionally designed to look simple without any eyes or other adornments. The ghosts were also meant to be cute and colorful, and never resemble traditional bad guys in video games. Iwatani would say in an interview that, quote, "This draws on Japan's age-old appreciation of wabi-sabi, where people found transient beauty and depth in simplicity." The game was originally called Pac-Man, which comes from the Japanese expression paku paku taburo, which literally refers to the way that Pac-Man's mouth opens and closes quickly. That name was changed to Puckman, which was changed to Pac-Man as part of an effort to frighten off vandals from making a change to Puckman's name that would have changed it to... you can figure that one out. Of course, Pac-Man has been a massive success. It inspired a television show, endless forms of branding and merchandise, countless ports, and even a weird hit single. By creating a mascot, Iwatani gave game enthusiasts more than just something to love. He gave them someone to love. And Pac-Man's relative blank slate, combined with his expanding video game family, created a commercial hit. The arcade game for Pac-Man generated an estimated $6 billion, and this in the early 1980s. It also undoubtedly generated billions more from its various merchandising and entertainment opportunities. Not bad for 7/8 of a pizza. Pac-Man may have been one of the first mascots and heroes with a name and recognizable face, mouth, but he was obviously the first in a long line of notable video game leaders. This leads to our next question. Who was the first female video game protagonist? You may default to Samus Aran, protagonist of the Metroid series. Good guess. After all, it was a legendary twist ending when Samus removed her helmet at the end of one of the good endings of the original Metroid, revealing her gender to the world. Of course, in another good ending, she also revealed that she was in a bikini, but let's just pretend that never happened. Anyway, while this is a solid guess, it's wrong. The first female protagonist in video game history was Ladybug. Ladybug was a 1981 maze game. Remember, this was at the height of Pac-Man's popularity. In the game, you play as the aforementioned Ladybug, collecting X's and avoiding evil bugs. What made Ladybug a bit more unique was the ability to change the maze, giving you new pathways to escape and trap the bad guys. In all fairness, this answer seems like a little bit of a cop-out, since you're playing as a ladybug, not an actual human. The same could be said for our next two games. First, you had Miss Pac-Man, which came out in 1982. That year also saw you gaining the ability to play as Mother Kangaroo in this 1982 game, creatively titled Kangaroo, which largely functions as a copy of Donkey Kong. However, if you want to further refine the answer, we can do that. The first playable human female character was Billy Sue, the main character of the game Wabbit. In that game, you throw rotten eggs at rabbits that are trying to take carrots from your farm. Interestingly enough, the game's programmer is also female. She was known by the name Bon Tron, though her real name was Von Mai. Being a woman in gaming was a relative rarity in the industry at the time. Okay, still is. As of 2021, roughly 30% of video game programmers are women. Now, while arcades became huge in the late 1970s and early 1980s, another video game trend was simultaneously sweeping the world: home consoles. While the Atari 2600 was the first massive worldwide home console success, it was not, by any stretch, the first home console system. That honor goes to the Magnavox Odyssey, which was released in 1972. Interestingly enough, somewhat reversed from later times, the Odyssey was first released in North America. It made it to England in 1973, then the rest of Europe and Japan in 1974. The original cost of the system was $99, which is about $720 today. Development of the product started in 1966 and was led by Ralph Baer, an engineer with Sanders & Associates, and a man commonly referred to as the father of video games. Baer worked with coworkers at Sanders and ultimately went through 7 different prototypes of the system. After mostly finalizing his design, Baer attempted to contract with others to produce and market it. He nearly had a deal with RCA, but that fell through. However, RCA executive Bill Enders would leave to go to Magnavox, and he brought Baer and the Odyssey along with him. So, how primitive, by today's standards, was the Odyssey? Well, it could only generate 3 square dots and a line. There was no music or sound, and the dots were in black and white. Plastic overlays had to be used to add graphics to the gameplay, and players had to independently track their own score using a pen and paper. The system itself came with a controller that had 3 knobs. 28 games were produced, which is remarkable when you consider the limitations of the system. Games included table tennis, a forerunner to Pong, as well as hockey, cat and mouse, haunted house, and more. Games came on game cards, with 11 game cards containing the 28 different games. This was not the last of the first generation of home console systems. Other efforts would include Home Pong and the Coleco Telestar. However, the Magnavox Odyssey did have a 3-year head start on the others in its generation. Despite this, the Odyssey only moved roughly 350,000 units, paling in comparison to the Telstar series and the Color TV game series of Nintendo, which sold 1 million and 3 million units each. Magnavox would create the Odyssey 2 before leaning in on their partnership with Philips and leaving the console industry. While Magnavox would never create a truly successful home console system, they will always be the ones who were first. Now, the Odyssey didn't actually sell game cartridges as we know them. Instead, they produced these game cards that contained multiple games. Indeed, none of the consoles of the first generation actually sold cartridges like what we have today, coming instead with either one game, like Home Pong, or integrated games, like the various Coleco Telstar units. So, what company and system were the first to sell singular game cartridges? That would be the Fairchild Channel F. The history of how the Fairchild Channel F was developed is kind of interesting. Its development started at Fairchild Camera and Instrument, which, as the name implies, dealt heavily with camera technology and research. Two employees of the Alpex Computer Corporation, Wallace Kirshner and Lawrence Haskell, developed the prototype for the Channel F. After connecting with a buyer at Fairchild and an evaluation by engineer Jerry Lawson, who would go on to make many improvements to the system, the company purchased and licensed the technology. In a lot of ways, the Fairchild Channel F was really ahead of its time. In addition to being the first home console to sell cartridges, it was also the first to contain a microprocessor. That meant that the graphics, which were colorized, were relatively fast and advanced for their time period. The Channel F used a deeply unique controller design. These detachable joysticks moved in 8 different directions, and later editions would come with a fire button. 27 games were ultimately made available in the United States, including Space War, Video Blackjack, Hangman, and more. They were called video carts, and contemporary reports indicated that they reminded people of yellow 8-track cartridges, complete with customized designs. While the Fairchild Channel F would be the first of its generation to produce games, it was not the only one. The Atari 2600, Bally Astrocade, Magnavox Odyssey 2, and Mattel Intellivision all had removable game cartridges, creating a new standard for video games. Ultimately, the Channel F couldn't compete with the 2600. After all, the Atari 2600 moved more than 30 million units, making it the most successful home console system until the Nintendo. So, if you like video games and search for them on YouTube, you've probably seen approximately 1 trillion videos on video game Easter eggs. They're a popular topic, and with good reason. They can provide some funny, fourth wall breaking insight into how our favorite video games were made and what the developers were thinking. What is commonly referred to as a first video game Easter egg is in Atari's game Adventure. In that game, programmer Warren Robinette, frustrated at Atari's failure to recognize the hard work of its programmers, added his name to the text of a room. This might be the most famous early Easter egg, but it's actually not the first. As noted by the Guinness Book of World Records, that honor goes to Starship One. Starship One was an arcade game for Atari. The game is basically a Star Trek ripoff. It's a first-person space shooter in which you kill the bad guys, relatively standard fare at the time. What makes this Easter egg so interesting is that no one, literally no one, discovered it for 50 years. In fact, we still wouldn't know about it today if not for research conducted by Ed Fries, a former vice president with Xbox and a game programmer himself. Fries has a sporadically updated blog, and as part of an effort to work on a car racing game, Grand Track 10, was interviewing people involved with the game. That included programmer Ron Milner. While interviewing Milner, he brought up the game Starship One and mentioned that he had programmed it with a backdoor that displayed the message, "Hi Ron," and gave 10 extra lives. Stunned, Fries set to work finding the code and figuring out how to access it. He downloaded a copy of the game and found the subsequent code. After reading the code, Fries was able to deduce how to activate the Easter egg in question. Armed with that data, Fries downloaded a MAME emulation of the game to confirm the Easter egg. With that complete, he ordered a literal copy of the arcade game, and after what sounds like a nightmare in repairs, got this. It was confirmed. Starship One, not Adventure, is the first true Easter egg of the video game era. As someone who is obsessed with video games, I don't think you can appreciate what we have without also appreciating where we've been. I'm also trying to give some perspective. Look at how far we've come, and imagine how far we have to go. And yes, I am trying to clearly, blatantly tickle your nostalgia. All of us can benefit from remembering past great games. If I did that successfully, and I hope you did, or if you want to yell at me because I got something wrong, let me know in the comments below. If you like what I have to offer on this channel, and I think you do since you made it to the end of the video, please like or subscribe so you can continue to get more great content. Have a wonderful day out there, friends. And as always, I hope you liked watching this video as much as I liked making it. Take care, folks.